He wasn't supposed to be there that day. He almost didn't go. A broken truck door, a forgotten soccer ball, a daughter who wouldn't stop begging, those were the only reasons Evan Mercer ended up on that park bench. And because he did, a little girl lived. But here's what nobody talks about what saving her cost him. Quiet life he'd spent 4 years building, the walls he'd carefully constructed around his heart, and the terrifying realization that one ordinary Saturday afternoon had just changed everything. For all of them. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you stories about real courage, ordinary people in extraordinary moments, and the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. Drop a like and tell us in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Go anywhere, because what happens next will stay with you long after it's over. Passenger door of Evan Mercer's truck made a sound like a dying animal every single time it opened. He'd been meaning to fix it for 3 months. He had the part sitting in a box in the garage, right next to Lily's old bicycle, with the training wheels she no longer needed, and a bag of motor oil he kept forgetting to use. The door was the kind of thing that lived permanently at the bottom of a to-do list, not because he couldn't fix it, but because every time he thought about getting around to it, something else grabbed his attention first. A leaking water heater, a job that ran late, Lily deciding at 9 p. on a Thursday that she absolutely needed a volcano model for school the following morning. Being a single father had a way of rearranging your priorities without asking permission. You said we were leaving at 9. It's 9:14. Evan looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Lily Mercer, age 8, was sitting with her arms folded and her soccer bag on her lap, wearing the patient expression of a child who had decided that being annoyed was more dignified than being loud about it. She had her mother's eyes. Dark brown, very direct, the kind of eyes that made you feel like you'd been caught doing something even when you hadn't. I was looking for your water bottle, he said. I have my water bottle. That's why I stopped looking. Lily unfolded her arms just long enough to hold up the water bottle, then refolded them. 14, Dad. 9:14, he agreed, and pulled out of the driveway. It was a Saturday in late April, which in their part of town meant the kind of morning that made you almost believe spring had decided to stay this time. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only showed up a handful of days, a year cloudless and deep, the kind of blue that made everything underneath it look a little more saturated than usual. Green lawns looked greener. Stop signs looked redder. Even the pothole on Birchwood Avenue, which Evan had been reporting to the city for 11 months without result, managed to look almost charming in the April light. He drove the way he always drove through residential streets, with his hands at 10 and 2 and his eyes doing a quiet inventory of everything around him. Old habit, the kind that didn't announce itself. A man standing too close to a corner. A car that had been parked in the same spot for 3 days. An argument happening behind a screen door. He didn't do it on purpose anymore. It just happened, the way breathing happened, the way checking the mirrors happened. Lily had stopped noticing that her father was always watching. She'd just grown up, assuming that's what dads did. Willow Creek Park sat at the eastern edge of their neighborhood, where the residential streets gave way to a stretch of open grass, oak trees, and a small botanical pavilion the city had restored about 10 years back. On ordinary weekends, it was dog walkers and joggers and kids on bikes. Today it was something else. There were catering tents near the pavilion, a small stage being set up near the east fountain, banner stretched between 2 oak trees that read, Westbrook Foundation Children's Literacy Event. Yes, Evan found a parking spot on the street, and Lily was out of the truck before the engine stopped the squealing door announcing her exit to the entire block. I'm going to find Mia, she said, already scanning the grass. Stay where I can see you. I know. Lily, she stopped and turned. Something in his voice, not the volume, not the sharpness, just something in the way he said her name made her actually look at him. Stay where I can see you, he said again. She held his gaze for a moment. Okay, Dad. I will. And she ran toward a cluster of kids near the far tree line, where a girl with 2 braids and a purple jacket was already waving at her. Stood by the truck for a moment. He did that sometimes still, while everything moved around him, just letting his eyes settle into a place before he committed to walking into it. The park was more crowded than usual because of the charity event. He estimated maybe 250 people, families mostly. A few older couples walking the perimeter, event staff in black polo shirts moving between the tents. A small security team near the pavilion entrance, earpieces visible, trying to look low profile while wearing the universal uniform of men who had been told to look low profile. He found a bench near the center path, a good bench, the kind with clear sight lines in most directions, and sat down with his coffee. He was watching Lily, but he was also watching everything else. It took him about 12 minutes to notice something was wrong. Because of any single thing. There was no gun visible, no obvious threat, no moment where some Hollywood alarm bell went off and the music changed. It was smaller than that. Quieter, a man in a gray jacket near the north entrance. Standing still while everyone else moved. His eyes drifting every 40 seconds or so toward the event's end stage, and then specifically toward a girl in a yellow dress, standing near the left side of the stage. 9 years old, maybe. Dark hair. She was talking to an event volunteer, pointing at the banner, completely unaware of anything. Evan looked away, drank his coffee, looked back. Gray jacket was still there. He shifted his gaze naturally, the way someone bored would shift it, and let it travel across the park until it found something else. A man in a blue windbreaker near the east fountain. Also standing still. Also watching the stage. Also watching the girl in the yellow dress. Evan's hand tightened very slightly around his coffee cup. He kept his face completely neutral. One man standing still is a man waiting for his wife. 2 men standing still in different locations, looking at the same child, is something else. He spent the next 4 minutes not looking for the others. He let his eyes move naturally, the way eyes moved when someone was just enjoying a Saturday morning. He looked at the catering tent. He looked at the pavilion. He looked at Lily, who was now playing some kind of tag variant, with Mia and 3 other kids near the tree line. And slowly, one by one, he found the others. A woman near the south bench, late 30s, athletic baseball cap low over her eyes. Watching her phone. Not talking to anyone. Watching the stage. A man in a red shirt near the parking lot entrance. Same posture. Same pattern. One more near the catering tent, partially obscured by the tent itself, but the angle of his shoulders gave him away. 5 people, different positions, different appearances, communication between them that Evan could see. But their eyes moved together, the way a school of fish moved together, not because they were talking, but because they all knew the plan. Evan set his coffee down. His heart rate had not changed. This was the part that used to unsettle the people who worked with him, that he could look at something terrible and his pulse stayed exactly where it was. Because he didn't care. Because caring and panicking were different things, and panic was just noise you couldn't afford. He reached into his pocket and found his phone. He called 911. 1. What's your emergency? I need to report a possible child abduction in progress. He kept his voice very low and very even. Willow Creek Park. I've identified 5 individuals positioned around the park who appear to be coordinating surveillance on a specific child near the Westbrook Foundation event. I'm a civilian. I'm not armed. I'm going to stay on the line, but I may need to move. A brief pause. Sir, can you describe white male, gray jacket, foot, entrance? White male, blue windbreaker, east fountain. White female, baseball cap, south bench. White male, red shirt, parking lot entrance. 5th individual, near the catering tent, partially obscured. He said it fast, but clearly. The child they're watching is a girl, approximately 9 years old, yellow dress, dark hair, currently near the left side of the event stage. Is a security team at the pavilion entrance, but they are not positioned to cover the child's current location. Longer this time. Sir, we're dispatching units. Please stay on the line and do not approach. Units are going to take 4 minutes minimum, Evan said. rudely. Just as a fact, these individuals are going to move before that. He stood up from the bench. Across the park, something had shifted. Gray Jacket was now moving, walking at a normal pace toward the south, which would take him toward the stage. Blue Windbreaker had straightened up. The woman in the baseball cap had taken a step forward. They were starting. "I'm moving," Evan told the dispatcher, and put the phone in his chest pocket with the lines still open. He didn't run. Running through a crowded park drew attention, and attention was the last thing he needed. He walked purposefully, but without urgency, the way a man walks when he knows exactly where he's going and has every right to go there. He cut left off the main path toward the maintenance corridor that ran along the back of the botanical pavilion. He'd noticed it when they'd arrived, an unpaved service path lined by a low hedge, used by groundskeeping staff to move equipment without crossing the main lawn. His mind was already 3 steps ahead. The disturbance would come first. That's how these operations worked. You created noise at the perimeter, pulled security toward it, and took the target in the window that noise created. The charity event was perfect for it. Lots of people, lots of movement, lots of variables for a security team to manage. He needed to reach the girl before the window opened. He moved through the maintenance path at pace, the hedge on one side, the pavilion glass on the other, gravel soft under his boots. 30 yards ahead, the path curved around toward the back of the event stage. He could hear the PA system from the event, someone doing a sound check, a microphone, squeal, polite laughter from the crowd. Sounds. Then from the north entrance, a crash. Something heavy going over like a catering cart tipping. Voices, shouting. He heard the security team's radio crackling before he even rounded the corner. There it is, the distraction. He came around the curve of the maintenance path and found himself 20 feet behind the left side of the event stage. The girl in the yellow dress was still there. She'd turned toward the commotion at the north entrance, which meant her back was partly to him. More importantly, her back was partly to the 2 men now moving toward her from the southwest. Evan didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the maintenance path, walked directly to her, and crouched down to her eye level. She startled badly, big dark eyes going wide, and took a step back. "Hey," Evan said. "Calm, quiet. I'm not going to hurt you. I need you to come with me, right now, away from these tents." "Okay," she stared at him. "Who are you?" He had about 4 seconds. "I'm a dad," he said. "My daughter's playing over there by the trees. I need you to walk with me toward her right now, and I'll explain everything. Okay? Can you do that? I need you to trust me just for about 30 seconds. She looked at him, then looked at the 2 men who were still maybe 20 feet away, moving through the crowd. Something in her face, 9 years old, smart enough to know something was wrong, made its decision. "Okay," she said. Evan stood, took her hand, and walked. Running, walking. The 2 men couldn't move fast through the crowd without drawing attention, which bought him the seconds he needed. He moved at an angle, not directly toward the tree line, toward the parking lot, but toward the nearest cluster of families near the center of the park. There were too many witnesses for anything to happen cleanly. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice conversational. "Sophie," she said. She was trying to match his pace and mostly managing it. "Evan, are you here with your mom?" "Yes." Sophie looked back toward the stage, then forward again. "She was right there." "She's fine," Evan said. He actually didn't know that for certain, but Sophie needed to walk in a straight line and not panic. "We're going to get back to her in a minute. Do you see all those families over there, near the fountain? We're walking toward them. You're doing great. Just keep walking." Sophie walked. Evan deposited her with a family of 4 near the center fountain, a couple with 2 young boys who seemed startled but immediately cooperative when Evan said quietly, "I need you to stay with this girl for 2 minutes. Police are on the way." Then he handed Sophie to the mother and looked at Sophie directly. "Move from here," he said. "Stay with these people." Sophie grabbed his arm. "Wait, I'll be back," he said. "Or the police will come first. Either way, you're safe right here." She let go. Slowly, Evan turned and moved back into the park. He was trying to locate all 5 individuals, re-established the picture when his stomach dropped. He found her immediately. She was still near the tree line, but so was a man in a red shirt. The same man from the parking lot entrance. He wasn't approaching her yet, but he was standing 20 feet away, and he'd stopped moving, and his eyes were on Lily. This was the thing Evan had been afraid of. The moment he'd seen, there were 5 of them. 5 people for one target was too many, which meant once the primary plan started failing, someone was going to improvise. He crossed the park in a very short amount of time. He came up to her from the side, put his hand on her shoulder. She spun, relieved, and then immediately suspicious, the way kids were, when they could tell something was wrong but couldn't identify it yet. "Dad, you remember the burger place on 5th Street? He was already scanning the surrounding area. Red shirt had clocked him. The man hadn't moved yet, but his body language had changed. "Yes," Lily said slowly. "The food stand's over. They are doing burgers." He pointed toward the catering tents, which were on the opposite side of the park from where the distraction had happened. "Go over there and get in line. Don't leave that line. Don't leave that area until I come get you. If someone you don't know tells you to go anywhere else." Her voice was very quiet. "What's happening?" He stopped and looked at her. He didn't have time for this, and he also didn't have the option of lying to her, because Lily could always tell. If she didn't trust his instructions, she might not follow them. "I need to handle something," he said, "and I can't do it if I'm worrying about you. So I need you to do exactly what I'm saying so I can focus, okay? Can you do that for me?" She studied his face. He watched her, read it, the calm, the stillness, the thing he couldn't quite hide. "Okay," she said, "but you're coming back." "I'm coming back," he said. "Promise me." He'd learned a long time ago not to make promises about things outside his control. Life had taught him that lesson the hardest possible way. But he looked at his daughter, 8 years old, hair escaping from her ponytail, the scar above her eyebrow from the monkey bars last summer, and made the promise anyway. "Promise," he said. She went. She didn't run. She walked toward the catering tents with her soccer bag over her shoulder, and she didn't look back. He gave her 10 seconds to get clear. Then he turned toward the red shirt. The man had started moving. Evan moved to intercept him, on a diagonal course that would cut him off before he could follow Lily's path, and the moment the man realized Evan was heading directly for him, with no intention of veering away, he stopped. Up close, the man was maybe 40, built wide through the shoulders. He had the stillness of someone who'd done things that required that kind of stillness. His eyes did a fast calculation and didn't like the result. They faced each other on the open grass for exactly 2 seconds. "The girl's already with police," Evan said, very quietly. "No, there are units arriving from the north entrance right now." He let that land. The man's jaw moved. Something flickered behind his eyes, not fear exactly, but the look of someone doing a very fast mental arithmetic and arriving at a number they didn't like. "Walk away," Evan said. "That's the only option left that doesn't end badly for you." A long beat. Then the man turned and walked toward the parking lot at a pace just slow enough not to draw attention. Evans watched him go, tracked him until he disappeared around the tree line, and then turned back to the park. 3 down, 2 remaining. From the direction of the botanical pavilion, the clouds that had been building since mid-morning finally made their decision. The first drops hit his face as he started walking. He found the woman in the baseball cap near the pavilion entrance. She'd lost the cap, probably ditched it when the operation started fragmenting, and he recognized her anyway by her posture, by the way she moved with that same controlled readiness that you couldn't fake. She was heading into the pavilion, which told him that the final piece of this, whatever it was moving inside. He followed her. The botanical pavilion was a long glass structure, warm even in late April, full of raised planting beds and stone pathways, and the kind of carefully arranged greenery that looked effortless because someone was paid a great deal to maintain it. In good weather, it was used for events, lectures, school tours. Right now, it was mostly empty. The charity event was outside, and the rain was starting to hit the glass ceiling in scattered bursts. He was about 30 feet into the pavilion when he found Sophie. She had not stayed with the family near the fountain. She was crouched behind a large planting bed on the right side of the central path, partially hidden by a stand of bamboo, her yellow dress completely wrong for hiding. She looked up at him with the expression of someone who had been trying very hard to be brave and was close to running out of the ability to try. I thought she started. It's okay, he said. He crouched down to her level again. Why didn't you stay by the fountain? A lady said she was from the event, and I needed to come with her. Sophie's voice was shaking slightly. She had a badge. Evan processed that. The badges were probably stolen or fabricated. Whoever planned this had thought it through. You ran, he said. She grabbed my arm. Sophie pulled up the sleeve of her dress. Red marks. I pulled away and ran in here because there were people. Smart, he said, and meant it. That was really smart, Sophie. She exhaled. Some of the shaking went out of her shoulders. I need you to do one more brave thing, Evan said. Can you do that? She nodded. From behind them, deeper in the pavilion, he heard footsteps on stone. There were two of them, the woman he'd followed in, and a man he recognized as the one who'd been standing near the catering. The fifth person, the last one unaccounted for. Evan looked at Sophie. You see that red exit sign at the far end? She looked. I'm going to walk you to it. When we get close, I'm going to tell you to run, and I need you to run through that door and keep running until you hit the police tape or find a uniform. Can you do that? What about you? I'll be right behind you. She studied him with those dark, serious eyes, the eyes of a child who had already learned, somewhere in her 9 years, that adults didn't always come behind you the way they said they would. You're going to handle those people, she said. Not a question. I'm going to make sure they don't follow you. Sophie straightened her shoulders. He stood and took her hand again, and they started moving down the central pathway of the pavilion. Two remaining were moving to intercept, not running, not yet, keeping it controlled. He's wanting to spook the target into sprinting. Smart, professional. He hated that they were good at this. He watched their positioning and made adjustments in real time. The woman was moving to his left to cut off the side path. The man was taking the direct center path, which meant Evan needed to get Sophie ahead of him and clear the center obstruction before they closed the distance. He picked up the pace. Sophie kept up. The man in the center path reached for something, not a weapon, but his radio, and Evan moved before the transmission went out. He angled sharply to the right, pulled Sophie into the gap behind a large decorative planter, and she came through cleanly. He said, and she ran. The woman pivoted to follow her. Evan stepped into her path. What followed lasted maybe 40 seconds and looked nothing like the movies. It wasn't clean or efficient or quiet. A heavy planting tray hit the stone floor. Something ceramic shattered. His left forearm took a hit that would bruise badly by morning. He got his hands on a column support, used the angle, and the woman went down hard between two raised beds and didn't get up quickly. The man from the center path came at him from behind. Evan heard him coming, footsteps on stone, rhythm changing, and turned into it instead of away from it. Controlled, absorbed, redirected. The man hit the ground next to the woman. Evan stood in the rain-streaked half-light of the pavilion for a moment, breathing through his nose, listening to the sound of the storm on the glass above him. He walked toward the exit. Through the glass walls, he could see the flashing lights. Police had arrived. He stepped out of the emergency exit into the rain, and a uniformed officer immediately put a hand up. Evan raised both hands, palms out. Civilian, he said. Evan Mercer. I called it in. There are two individuals down inside the pavilion. He paused. And the girl, Sophie. Where is she, sir? I need you to. Is the girl safe? Sir, is the girl safe? A second officer came forward. The girl's with EMS near the north entrance. She's not hurt. Evan's hands came down. His shoulders dropped about half an inch, not visible to most people, but it was there. Okay, he said. Okay. He walked back through the rain toward the catering tents. Lily was still in line. Of course she was. She was still in line with her soccer bag over her shoulder, standing behind a family of six who were trying to decide between the chicken and the burgers. The rain just starting to reach the tents, and everyone shuffling forward under the edge of the canopy. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and whatever expression he was wearing, whatever had leaked through the stillness, made her eyes go wide for just a second. Then she walked out of the line and directly to him. He dropped to one knee on the wet grass. He meant to say something reassuring, something calm and fatherly and appropriate to the moment. Instead, he just pulled her in and held on. She didn't say anything either. She was 8 years old, and she'd stayed exactly where he told her to stay. And she'd been frightened the entire time, and she hadn't moved. He felt her arms go around his neck, and she gripped him with the particular desperation of a child who has been trying very hard to be brave, and has now been given permission to stop. She finally said into his collar. "Yeah," he said. "Your jacket is soaking wet." He laughed. It surprised him came out rough and unplanned, more like a cough than anything else. But it was real. "Sorry about that," he said. She pulled back and looked at his face the way she'd always been able to look at him and know something he hadn't said. "Is the little girl okay?" He looked at his daughter. He said, "She's okay." Lily nodded, as if that settled something she'd been holding in her chest. The rain came down steadily now, soaking the lawn and drumming on the catering tent overhead, and washing in the afternoon into something quieter, something that felt almost ordinary again. Evan stayed on one knee in the wet grass for a moment longer than he needed to. Around them, the park was full of police radios and raised voices, and the general controlled chaos of an operation in its aftermath. Somewhere near the north entrance, a little girl in a yellow dress was being wrapped in an emergency blanket. Somewhere inside the glass pavilion, two people who had made very specific professional choices were being taken into custody. And here, under the edge of a catering tent, a mechanic from Birchwood Avenue was kneeling in the mud with his arms around his daughter, his left forearm already beginning to stiffen, his coffee long since gone cold. He'd spent 4 years building a life small enough to protect, quiet enough to keep. He had no idea, kneeling there in the rain with Lily's arms around his neck, that the life he'd spent 4 years building small was about to expand in a direction he never saw coming. Just knew that for right now, for this exact moment with the rain on the tent and his daughter breathing beside him, they were okay. Both of them. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Police kept him for 2 hours and 40 minutes. In handcuffs, not in any kind of formal custody. In that particular limbo that civilians found themselves in, after something violent happened, and the people with badges needed to understand exactly what had occurred before they let anyone walk away. Evan sat in the back of an unmarked vehicle with a paper cup of bad coffee, and at the same questions in slightly different orders for 3 different people. And he did it without impatience, because he understood the process. He'd been on the other side of it enough times to know that the repetition wasn't incompetence. It was method. You asked the same question, requies, and compared the answers, and if the story stayed consistent, you started believing it. His story stayed consistent because it was just what happened. Lily sat in a separate patrol car with a female officer named Reyes, who had apparently located a bag of gummy bears from somewhere and was letting Lily work through them at her own pace. Evan could see her through the rain-streaked window, still in her soccer gear, soccer bag on her lap, systematically eating the red ones first. Told her he'd be done soon. She'd said okay in the tone she used, when okay meant "I don't entirely believe you, but I'm choosing to accept it." The detective in charge of the scene was a heavy-set man named Kowalski, mid-50s, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too many years reading reports in bad lighting. He didn't introduce himself as lead detective. He just sat across from Evan in the vehicle, opened a notebook to a blank page, and said, "Walk me through it again." Evan walked him through it again. When he got to the part where he'd intercepted Sophie before the 2 kidnappers could take her, Kowalski stopped writing and looked up. "You took the child yourself," he said. Not a question. An accusation, exactly. Just a fact he was laying on the table between them to see how Evan would respond to it. "I moved her away from 2 people who were converging on her while her security team was occupied with a staged trick," Evan said. No. without identifying yourself. There wasn't time to produce a business card. Kowalski wrote something down. And in the pavilion. Yes, you engaged physically with two individuals. They were between a 9-year-old girl and the exit door. Kowalski looked at him for a moment. The look wasn't hostile. It was the look of a man doing a calculation, the kind of calculation where one side of the equation was liability and procedure, and the other side was a little girl in a yellow dress who was currently wrapped in an emergency blanket instead of being in a car with people who'd planned to hurt her. What branch? Kowalski said. Evan took a sip of the bad coffee. Then some other things. Some other things, Kowalski repeated. Flat. And now you're a mechanic. Marine mechanic. He paused. It's different. I imagine it is. Kowalski closed his notebook about halfway. The men and women we have in custody right now, 2 from the pavilion, 1 from the north entrance, 1 who we picked up trying to exit the parking lot. These are not amateurs. These are organized, professional. We're going to need your cooperation in the investigation going forward. Whatever you need, Evan said. The 5th individual. The one you confronted on the grass. He walked toward the parking lot. I gave you the description. We haven't located him yet. Evan nodded. He'd expected that. The red shirt had made a clean exit, which meant he was the one with the most experience at making clean exits. He'd show up eventually, in a database or in surveillance footage from a gas station, 3 counties over. These things took time. One more thing, Kowalski said. The girl's mother. I haven't spoken to her. You'd like to. Evan looked out the window at the rain. It had settled from a downpour into a steady gray drizzle that showed no interest in stopping. Yes? Park looked different now. Half the catering tents had collapsed or been abandoned. Crime scene tape was stretched between the oak trees, and the banner for the Westbrook Foundation literacy event was hanging at an angle, one corner having come loose from its tie. He said. She's been asking since we brought Sophie out of the pavilion, Kowalski said. I told her to give us time. We're out of time. Evan set down the paper cup. All right. He got out of the vehicle into the drizzle, walked to the patrol car where Lily was sitting, and opened the door. She looked up from the gummy bears with the expression of someone who had been expecting this for at least 20 minutes. I need 5 more minutes, he told her. You've said that twice. Reyes, can she stay with you? Officer Reyes, who had the particular quality of patience that came from years of working with both children and crime scenes, said yes without making it sound like any kind of burden. Lily handed him a gummy bear orange, which she normally ate last, and said nothing. He took it, ate it, and walked toward the north entrance. Camille Westbrook was standing near one of the remaining intact tents, with her arms folded across her chest and her daughter pressed against her side. Sophie had changed out of the yellow dress. Someone had found her a police department zip-up sweatshirt that was approximately 4 sizes too large, and she had her face turned partly into her mother's arm. The emergency blanket was still around her shoulders, crinkled and silver. Camille herself was not what Evan had expected, and he wasn't entirely sure what he had expected. She was 30 maybe, with the kind of composure that didn't come from being calm. It came from being extremely good at looking calm while you were actually somewhere else entirely. Her clothes were expensive in the way that expensive clothes tried not to look expensive. Her hair was coming out of whatever it had been arranged into, and she hadn't bothered to fix it. There were tear tracks on her face that she'd made no effort to hide, and currently, she was wearing the expression of a woman who had spent the last 2 hours in controlled terror and was now running on the shaky aftermath of it. She saw Evan coming and said, before he'd reached her, "Are you the one?" "My name is Evan Mercer," he said. "Yes." She stared at him for a moment. Just took him in the wet jacket, the mud on his knee from where he'd been kneeling in the grass, the left arm that he was holding very slightly off his body, because the forearm had stiffened up considerably in the last hour. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine. Your arm—" "It's fine," he said it without impatience. "How is she?" Camille looked down at Sophie, then back up. She stopped. Tried again. The paramedic said she's not hurt. Physically. She's... Another stop. The composure cracked just barely at the edge, the way glass cracked before it shattered, and then she pulled it back. She's Sophie. She's stubborn and terrified, and pretending she's not terrified, and telling me she handled herself, which her voice caught. Apparently she did. She did, Evan said. She made smart decisions in a very bad situation. Sophia detached slightly from her mother's arm during this exchange, and was now looking at Evan with those same dark, direct eyes from the pavilion. Yes, she'd been studying him, he realized, taking inventory the way kids did when they were trying to figure out if an adult was worth trusting. You came back, she said. Told you I would. Sophie considered this, then said, You also said you'd be right behind me. He'd been a little slower behind her than that. He accepted the point. I had some things to take care of first. 2 people, Sophie said, with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who had already metabolized something that would take most adults considerably longer. You had to handle 2 people. Camille made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else entirely. Sophie, she said softly. I'm just saying what happened, Sophie said. Evan looked at this 9-year-old in an oversized police sweatshirt and an emergency blanket, standing in the drizzle with her chin slightly raised, thought that she was going to be absolutely formidable someday. The world was careful enough not to break that quality before she got there. You're right, he said. I had to handle 2 people. He looked at Camille. She's going to be okay. Camille held his gaze for a moment. He'd intervened. She was looking for something he could feel her reading his face, the way Lily read his face, looking for the thing underneath the words. What she found there. Thank you, she said. Came out very quiet, like a word she'd been holding for 2 hours under a lot of pressure, and was only now letting out. I can't. She shook her head slightly. I don't know how to say it in a way that fits what you did. You don't need to, Evan said. He meant it. There was no version of thank you that was going to do anything productive for either of them right now, and he'd never been comfortable receiving things he didn't know what to do with. Where's your security team? Camille blinked. The shift surprised her from the emotional register into the practical one. Kowalski has them. 2 of my people went with the fake disturbance. 1 stayed with me. My security director has been with the police since. She stopped. Something flickered across her face. Something uncomfortable. Since the beginning, she finished. His name is Holloway? Evan said. His eyes sharpened. How do you know that? I don't. I'm guessing. Kowalski will tell you. He paused, choosing the words carefully. People who planned this knew too much about your setup. Your schedule, which entrance Sophie would use, where your security team would be positioned. That's not something you get from surveillance alone. Went very still. You're saying someone told them, she said. I'm saying the police are going to have that question, and you should be ready for it. He kept his voice level. I'm sorry. That's not something you need to hear right now, Camille said slowly. She was processing it. He could see it moving through her, the shape of the betrayal, taking form before she'd even confirmed it was real. You're right. I need to know, she exhaled. Everything. Sophie had gone quiet, attention, beside her mother, listening with the particular attention of a child who understood that the adults were talking about something important and had made the decision to be invisible so they wouldn't be sent away. Evan looked at her and said, You did good today, Sophie, she said. And then, after a beat, your daughter. Is she okay? He hadn't expected the question, not from a 9-year-old who'd just lived through the afternoon she'd lived through. He felt something shift in his chest at the fact that she was asking. She's in a police car eating gummy bears, he said. She's okay. Sophie nodded, satisfied. What's her name? How old? 8. Sophie considered this with the gravity of a world authority on the subject of 8-year-olds. She's a year younger than me, she said. She is. Is she good at soccer? Evan almost smiled. She thinks she is. Sophie plays soccer, Camille said quietly. She was watching this exchange with an expression he couldn't quite name, something careful and a little raw. The way people looked when they were witnessing something that moved them and weren't sure yet what to do with being moved. There was a beat of ordinary, almost absurd normalcy between all of them, a mother, a mechanic, child in an emergency blanket talking about soccer in the drizzle with crime scene tape in the background, and then Kowalski materialized from behind one of the tents and said, "Mr. Sir, we need you for one more thing." Evan looked at Camille. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything particularly meaningful. With the look, it was just the look of two people acknowledging that ordinary life was going to have to wait. "I'll be in touch," Kowalski said to Camille. "Don't go far." They walked away. Evan didn't look back. He heard Sophie say to her mother, a voice she clearly thought was quieter than it was, "Mom, he's the one who said he was a dad." And he heard Camille say, "I know, baby." And he heard Sophie say, "I believed him right away." He didn't hear Camille's answer to that. The next 3 days were paperwork and phone calls, and a formal statement at the precinct that took 4 hours and covered the same ground as Kowalski's interview, but with a transcription service and 2 additional detectives in the room. His forearm turned purple from elbow to wrist, and Lily announced every morning that it looked worse than the day before, which was accurate, and that he should see a doctor, which he did not do. He wrapped it himself, told the shop he'd had an accident with a bilge pump, and went back to work on the 40-foot cabin cruiser that had been sitting on his lift since Thursday. The marina was a good place to be after something like that. The work was physical and specific, and it demanded exactly the amount of attention that left no room for anything else. A faulty fuel injector required his whole mind. A corroded propeller shaft required his whole mind. The boats didn't care about Willow Creek Park. They just needed what they needed, and Evan provided it. And at the end of the day, his hands were dirty, and his body was tired in the right way. Lily, for her part, handled the aftermath, the way she handled most things, by asking direct questions. Until she has enough information to build an internal picture, and then going quiet while she processed it. She asked him the first night what exactly had happened in the park. He gave her an honest account, simplified by maybe 30%. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when he finished, she said, "The girl from the yellow dress." "Sophie, is she going to be scared now?" "Probably for a while," Evan said. "Are you going to be scared?" He thought about it. He said, "But I'm going to be paying attention for a while." Lily seemed to find this acceptable. She ate 6 more bites of her dinner, then said, "I stayed in line. The whole time, even when the police cars came." "Lily, you did exactly what I asked." She stabbed a piece of broccoli, with perhaps more force than was strictly necessary. "It was hard," she said. "Just so you know, it was really hard to stay there." "It was," he said. "I'm proud of you." She looked up. 8 years old, and trying to look like that didn't matter, and not quite pulling it off. "Yeah," he said. "Absolutely." She went back to the broccoli slightly less aggressively. School, Mia had apparently told everyone that Lily's dad was a superhero, a claim which Lily reported to Evan with the careful neutrality of someone who found the story both embarrassing and privately gratifying. Evan said he was definitely not a superhero, and Lily said she knew that, and had told Mia that, and Mia had said that he kind of was, and Lily had said, "Fine, but don't say it loud." He left it at that. Call from Kowalski came on Tuesday evening, while Evan was standing at the kitchen counter trying to figure out what to do with a butternut squash he'd bought at the farmer's market 2 weeks ago without any actual plan for it. "We have a development," Kowalski said. "Holloway," Evan said. "A beat. How did you know?" Kowalski said. "You're calling me Tuesday evening about a development. If the development was about the 5 people you already had, you'd have called during business hours. A development at 7 p.m. means something broke open today." He turned the butternut squash in his hands. "It's the inside person. It's Holloway." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. "We found communications on a burner device. Westbrook's schedule, her daughter's school pickup times, security rotation details, event, layout. Going back 4 months." Evan set the squash down. 4 months. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. Kowalski's voice was tired in the way that voices got, when what they were reporting was genuinely ugly. The organization that contracted the kidnapping group were looking at an extortion play. The daughter as leverage against the company, who stood to lose substantially if it closed. Business, Evan said flatly. Business, Kowalski confirmed, with equal flatness. We're making arrests in the morning. I wanted you to know before it became public, given your involvement. Appreciate it. There's one more thing. A pause. The fifth man. Red shirt. We identified him from the parking lot footage. He's going to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. The case against the organizers gets significantly stronger. Evan said. Ms. Westbrook has been informed, Kowalski said. She asked if we could pass along that she'd like to speak with you. At your convenience. No obligation. Evan looked at the butternut squash for a moment. I'll reach out, he said, without entirely deciding that he meant it. He didn't reach out for 11 days. He told himself it was because the week was busy, which it was. The cabin cruiser had turned into a 2-week job after he found additional corrosion in the hull fittings. He told himself it was because he didn't know what there was to say, which was partially true. He'd done what he'd done. Sophie was safe. The police had the rest. There wasn't a clear script for what came after a stranger. Saved your kid in a park and then went back to fixing boats. The real reason, if he was being honest with himself, and he mostly tried to be, was simpler and less comfortable than either of those things. Camille Westbrook was not a woman you could do a simple favor for, because of who she was or what she had, because of the way Sophie had said, I believed him right away, and the way Camille had said, I know, baby. Because he'd spent 4 years making sure his life was a certain size, and something about that parking lot conversation in the drizzle had felt like a door he didn't know if he had the right to walk through. He reached out on a Wednesday via a number Kowalski had left for him. He sent a text because calling felt like more of a commitment than the situation had earned yet. This is Evan Mercer. Kowalski said you wanted to talk. I'm around if you want to meet somewhere. Her reply came in 4 minutes. Yes. Are you free Saturday morning? There's a diner on Clement Street, Patty's. It's not your neighborhood. Sophie wants to come, if that's okay. He read it twice. Then he wrote back, Saturday works. Sophie's welcome. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the cabin cruiser. That Friday night, Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table while Evan cleaned up from dinner, and she said, without looking up from her math worksheet, You're being weird. I'm washing dishes, he said. You're being weird while washing dishes. He dried a mug. How am I being weird? You keep looking at your phone. She underlined something on her worksheet. You never look at your phone. This was more or less true. He used his phone the way he used most tools when there was a specific task for it, and not otherwise. He was not a man who scrolled. I have a meeting tomorrow, he said. On a Saturday? Not a work meeting. Lily looked up then. Zietz. She had that expression again, the reading expression, the one that saw more than he intended to show. Is it the lady from the park? She said. He turned and looked at her. What makes you say that? Mia's mom said on the news they arrested someone who worked for her. She went back to her worksheet. And you went quiet after that. And at your phone. And you've been looking at your things. And unless you're thinking about something you don't want to talk about. 8 years old, he thought. She was 8 years old. It's a meeting, he said, to talk about what happened. At a diner? Lily, I'm just asking. She erased something with considerable effort. Her daughter, Sophie. Is she coming? He hesitated. Lily absorbed this. She finished the erasing and rewrote the number. She said she asked if I was okay. Through Kowalski. He told me. He said a girl named Sophie asked about me. Evan had not known that. He went still for a moment. She did? He said. She said to tell me I was brave for staying in the line. Lily's pencil moved across the paper. Thought that was nice. Most kids wouldn't know to say that. He stood with the dish towel in his hands, looking at his daughter. He said, They wouldn't. Lily finished the row of math problems and flipped to the next page. If Sophie comes tomorrow, she said, casual as anything, can I come too? He should have said, let's see how tomorrow goes. He should have said, it's a grown-up meeting, and I'll tell you about it after. He should have said he'd think about it. Instead, he said, yeah, you can come. Lily nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer and went back to her homework. He went back to the dishes. Outside, the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods did on Friday evenings, a lawnmower somewhere down the street. A dog barking twice and stopping. The distant sound of a television through someone's open window. The ordinary low-frequency hum of people living their ordinary lives. Evan's kitchen smelled like the pasta he'd overcooked by 4 minutes, and Lily's math homework was spread across the table, and the dish towel in his hands was the same one he'd had for 2 years and needed to be replaced. Thought about Camille Westbrook standing in the drizzle, with her daughter pressed against her side and tear tracks on her face that she hadn't bothered to hide. Thought about Sophie in the pavilion, crouched behind the bamboo in her yellow dress. You're going to handle those people like it was the most natural conclusion in the world. Thought about 4 years of building his life into something exactly the size it needed to be to stay safe. He put the dish towel down on the counter. He looked out the kitchen window, at the backyard, the grass that needed cutting, the garage with the butternut squash still sitting on the workbench because he'd forgotten it again. He didn't know what Saturday was going to be. Framework for it. No operational picture, no clear objective beyond showing up at a diner on Clement Street and having a conversation with a woman he'd met in a crisis and her daughter who had asked if Lily was okay. Yes, he'd intervened. He'd been trained for a lot of things. He'd spent the better part of a decade preparing for scenarios of various difficulty levels, and he'd handled most of them the way he'd been taught. God had ever trained him for this. From the table, Lily said, without looking up, Dad, "You're doing the staring at nothing thing again." "I know," he said. "You okay?" He picked the dish towel back up. He said, "Okay." It wasn't quite true, and it wasn't quite false. Sentence he'd seen. It was somewhere in the honest middle of a Friday night, in a kitchen that smelled like overcooked pasta, with his daughter at the table, and a Saturday he didn't know how to prepare for sitting just ahead of him. And for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't sure whether the walls he'd built around their quiet little world were something he was standing inside of, or something he'd been standing behind. Patty's Diner on Clement Street was the kind of place that had been the same for 30 years and intended to stay that way. The booths were red vinyl, cracked in specific places that the regulars probably knew by heart. The coffee came in ceramic mugs that had been through a dishwasher approximately 10,000 times. The menu was laminated, and enormous and featured photographs of the food that had been taken, Evan estimated, sometime during a previous decade. The smell was bacon grease and coffee, and something sweet from the pie display on the counter, and the whole place had the particular warmth of somewhere that had fed a lot of people through a lot of ordinary mornings. Evan and Lily arrived 4 minutes early. He found a booth near the window, force of habit, clear sight lenses, nearest exit visible, and they sat down. Lily put her jacket on the seat beside her and picked up the laminated menu with the gravity of someone conducting a formal review. "They have pancakes," she announced. "Most diners have pancakes. These have blueberries." She studied the photograph. "And also chocolate chips. At the same time." "That sounds like too much." "That sounds like exactly enough." She set the menu down. "Are you nervous?" He looked at her. "I'm having coffee." "That wasn't what I asked." The bell above the diner door rang, and Evan looked up. Camille Westbrook came in first, scanning the room the way people did when they were looking for someone they'd only met in a crisis and weren't entirely sure they'd recognize in ordinary daylight. She was dressed simply dark jeans, a cased gray sweater, her hair down in a way that made her look younger and less composed than she'd looked in the park, which Evan suspected was intentional or at least hoped for. Behind her, Sophie came through the door, wearing a blue jacket and a backpack that seemed excessive for a Saturday morning at a diner, and she was already looking past her mother at the booths with an expression of open assessment. She found Evan first, then she found Lily. The assessment shifted into something more focused. They came to the booth. There was a moment the particular social awkwardness of two adults who had met under catastrophic circumstances now attempting to navigate the architecture of a normal introduction where nobody immediately said anything. Lily solved it. She looked at Sophie across the table and said, "Are you the one from the park?" Sophie looked at Lily. "Are you the one who stayed in line?" Kowalski told me, Sophie said. He said you stayed the whole time. Lily paused. It was hard. I know, Sophie said with complete sincerity. I would have hated that. They looked at each other for another beat. The way children looked at each other when they were deciding something, apparently whatever they decided was satisfactory. Because Sophie slid into the booth next to Lily without being asked and picked up the other laminated menu. Camille and Evan were left standing. Hi, Camille said. Hi, he said. They sat down. The waitress appeared almost immediately, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that said Dorothy and an expression that suggested she had seen everything twice and found most of it mildly entertaining. She poured coffee for the adults without asking, produced a small pad, and looked at the girls. What are we thinking? Blueberry chocolate chip cakes, Lily said, without hesitation. Sophie looked at the menu for approximately 2 more seconds and said, Same. Good call, Dorothy said, and was gone. Camille wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Evan did the same. Across the table, Sophie and Lily had apparently already moved on to some kind of quiet conversation about something involving the backpack, which Sophie was now partially unzipping. She brought her switch, Camille said at a low volume. She insisted. I told her it wasn't that kind of meeting, and she said she'd put it away if she didn't need it, and apparently she doesn't need it. Lily brought her lucky eraser, Evan said. Camille looked at him. She has a lucky eraser, he said, from 3rd grade. She brings it when she's going somewhere uncertain. Almost smiled. Does it work? She thinks it does so. He shrugged. It was a beat that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but was the kind of beat that had weight in it. 2 people who needed to talk, sitting with the knowledge that they needed to talk, and neither quite ready to begin. Began. I want to say thank you properly, she said. I tried at the park, and I don't think I managed it. You managed it fine, Evan said. I was in shock, she said. I don't want to dress it up. I spent 2 hours thinking Sophie was gone, and then she wasn't, and then you were standing there, and I couldn't find words that fit the size of it. She met his eyes directly. Still can't, but I want to try. Evan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You don't need to fit it to a size. She's safe. That's the whole thing. Camille watched him. You're not good at being thanked, she said. I'm fine at it. You're really not. There was no sharpness in it. Being zinged. I've been thanked for things my entire career, and I know what it looks like when someone doesn't know what to do with it. He drank his coffee. I did what made sense. A kid was in danger, and I was the person who could see it. That's all it was. That's not all it was, Camille said quietly. That's the beginning of what it was. What it was, fully, is that a stranger chose to put himself between my daughter and people who planned her abduction for 4 months. Obligation, no affiliation, no reason except she stopped. Except whatever reason that is. He didn't have a clean answer for that, so he didn't manufacture one. Sophie's voice drifted across the table. Lily, have you ever played? And then something lower that Evan couldn't catch. Kowalski called me, he said, about Holloway. Camille's expression changed. Didn't collapse or harden. It did the thing faces did when they touched something they hadn't finished processing. I'm sorry, he said. That kind of thing is worse than the strangers, she said. Yes, that's exactly what it is. She looked down at her coffee. Grant Holloway has worked for me for 3 years. I trusted him with everything. My schedule, my home address, Sophie's school. He knew which door Sophie used at every event because he helped design the security protocols. She paused. Came to Sophie's birthday party last October. Evan said nothing. There wasn't anything useful to say. The police say he was paid a significant amount, Camille continued. That he'd been in financial trouble for a while, and nobody knew. She shook her head slightly. I should have known. You couldn't. I should have, she said, firm but not harsh. I build systems for a living, systems with redundancies and checks and failure points. And I trusted a person outside the system because I liked him. Because he was good at his job and he was kind to Sophie. And I stopped looking, she looked up. That's on me. He respected that she said it that way, making herself a victim of it, not excusing herself from it. Just looking at it straight. What happens to the company, he asked. publicly. We're managing it quietly. The financing deal went through 2 days ago, which is," she gave a short, humorless exhale, ironic, given that the deal was apparently why all of this happened. Competitor who paid for the operation thought blocking the deal through Sophie was easier than blocking it through me, directly. Her jaw tightened briefly. They were wrong on multiple levels. They usually are, Evan said. I'm rebuilding the security team, she said, top to bottom. Protocols. No vetting process. My operations director has been managing it. She paused. I've also hired 2 full-time people specifically for Sophie's protection going forward. She's not thrilled about it. From across the table, as if she'd heard her name through the ambient noise, Sophie said, without looking up, from whatever she and Lily were doing, I heard that. I know you did, Camille said. I don't need 2 people following me everywhere. Yes, you do, Mom Sophie. Camille's voice was gentle and completely immovable. Today, Sophie made a sound that was somewhere between acceptance and protest, and went back to her conversation with Lily. Dorothy came back with the pancakes. The plates were enormous. The pancakes were stacked 3 high, and the blueberries and chocolate chips were distributed with the generosity of a place that didn't believe in doing things halfway. Both girls went silent for approximately 5 seconds at the sight of them. Lily looked at Evan. You were right, she said. It's too much. It's exactly enough, Sophie said firmly, and picked up her fork. Lily picked up hers. Evan watched the 2 of them for a moment, the easy, unearned quality of their comfort with each other, the way kids could make friendship out of almost nothing if you gave them 20 minutes and a shared menu. Sophie was confident in a way that had clearly been shaped by a life lived in rooms full of adults. Lily was precise in a way that had clearly been shaped by a life lived with a father who paid attention. They were different in ways that were visible immediately, and apparently unbothered by those differences, which was maybe the most purely 8- and 9-year-old thing about either of them. Lily seems good, Camille said low. She's resilient, Evan said. Always has been. Did she talk about it? Afterward? She asked questions until she had enough to work with, and then she processed it herself. He paused. She told me it was hard to stay in line. It was hard for her to stay, Camille said. And she still did. Yeah. Camille looked at her coffee. Sophie ran, she said, in the pavilion. She didn't wait. She pulled away from the woman and ran. She said it with a complicated mixture of things, the pride and the terror of it, living right next to each other. Taught her to run. I always told her if someone grabs you, you scream and you run. She did exactly what I told her. It was the right call, Evan said. She looked up. I know it was. But I wasn't there. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was the effortful kind. I was 40 feet away with my back turned, and my daughter was being grabbed, and I wasn't there. Couldn't have seen it coming. From inside the event, he said. She said again, Camille. He waited until she looked at him. She made it. She's eating chocolate chip pancakes and arguing about personal security. She made it. Camille held his gaze for a long moment. How do you do that? She said. Do what? Stay that calm. Everything. At the park right now. She gestured slightly. You're just even. All the time. How is that possible? He thought about it. He gave it an honest 10 seconds, instead of reaching for the comfortable deflection. I'm not calm, he said. I just learned a long time ago that panic was a resource I couldn't afford. Stopped spending it. He looked at his coffee. Doesn't mean things don't hit me. They just hit me later. When there's room for it. She was quiet for a moment. When did it hit you? From the park? He glanced at the girls. Absorbed in their pancakes and whatever conversation was happening between them, not listening. When I found Lily at the catering tent, he said. She was still in line, still exactly where I told her to be. She'd been standing there alone and frightened for 20 minutes, and she'd done it because I asked her to. He stopped, knelt down in the mud, and I held on for longer than I should have. In front of a crowd and police tape and everything. He looked up. That's when it hit me. Camille looked at him in a way that he wasn't entirely comfortable with, not because it was unkind, but because it was the look of someone actually seeing you, not just looking at you. She's lucky to have you, she said. I'm lucky to have her, he said. It goes both ways, Sophie said. Across the table, Dad, can I have some of your weight? You're not her dad. Lily said with great patience, his name is Evan. Evan, Sophie said, turning to him without any apparent self-consciousness about the near miss. Do you want to try a bite? They're actually really good. He reached across the table with his fork and took a small piece of pancake with exactly one blueberry and one chocolate chip on it. He ate it. Yeah, he said. That's too much. It's perfect, Sophie said, and turned back. Covered her mouth for a moment. When her hand came down, she was smiling, and it was the smile that happened to you, instead of the kind you produced on purpose, unguarded and a little helpless against itself. He hadn't seen her smile before. At the park, there had been shock and relief, and tears she hadn't hidden. The tent, there had been composure assembled back into place over something still shaking underneath. This was different. This was just a person sitting in a diner booth smiling because a 9-year-old had offered a stranger a bite of pancake. He looked back at his coffee. They stayed for an hour and 40 minutes. It didn't feel like it. It felt like 40 minutes at the most, or maybe like a different measurement of time, entirely the kind that moved at the pace of a conversation that had somewhere to go and kept finding new places to go when it got there. Camille talked about the company, not in the way people talked about their work when they wanted to impress you, but in the way people talked about something that genuinely occupied them. Frustrations and decisions and a deal in Singapore that had taken 14 months to close and had almost collapsed 3 times. He asked questions that came from actual curiosity, and she answered them the same way. She asked him about the marina, about how he'd ended up doing marine mechanics, what it was like to work on boats all day. And he found that he was talking about it without the careful shortening he usually applied to descriptions of his own life. She didn't ask about his military background, not directly. He noticed the not asking, which meant she'd noticed the shape of it, and made a deliberate decision about whether to push on it. The decision was no. He filed that away without entirely meaning to. Across the table, Sophie had produced from the enormous backpack a small notebook in which she apparently kept a running list of every restaurant she'd eaten in, rated out of 10, with brief annotations. Lily was utterly fascinated by this system. They spent 20 minutes debating the specific criteria for a rating, during which Sophie revealed the existence of a subscore for bread baskets that was factored separately. And Lily said that was the most complicated thing she'd ever heard. And Sophie said it was actually very simple once you understood the logic. And Lily said, okay, explain the logic. And Sophie explained the logic. At the end of it, Lily said, all right, that's actually not that complicated. She does that with everything, Camille said quietly, watching them. Which part? The systems, the lists. She has a rating system for movies, a rating system for soccer positions, a rating system for teachers based on how clearly they explain things before they expect you to do them. She shook her head slightly. I have no idea where she gets it. You build systems for a living, Evan said. Opened her mouth and closed it. Fair, she said. When Dorothy came back with the check, there was a brief and entirely predictable standoff in which Camille reached for it and Evan had already picked it up. Camille said that's unnecessary. He said it was a coffee and 2 stacks of pancakes. She said that wasn't the point. He said it was going to be $14, and he thought he could handle it. She said she was worth several $100 million. He said he was aware of that, and the check was still $14. She looked at him for a moment. Fine, she said. He paid the $14 and left Dorothy 4 more. Outside on Clement Street, the morning had turned the kind of bright that happened after rain. The sidewalk still faintly damp, the air with that particular clean quality that only lasted a few hours. Sophie and Lily were standing slightly ahead of the adults, Sophie pointing at something down the block that had Lily's full attention. There's a bookstore, Sophie reported back. It has a window display about space. Lily looked at Evan. Can we look? Sure, he said. The girls went ahead, close enough to be visible, far enough to have their own conversation. Evan and Camille walked behind them at the unhurried pace of people not entirely ready for the morning to end. "I want to ask you something," Camille said, "and I want you to know it's a genuine question, not a setup." "All right," he said. "I've had people offer to help me since the park. My legal team, my board, the company's crisis management consultant. Everybody has a plan for what I should do next, and I appreciate it. But every conversation feels like they're talking about a situation, not..." She paused. "What I want to ask is, what would you do if it were you? With Sophie, with rebuilding the security." She stopped again. "It's not your problem. It's not that," he said. "Then what is it?" He watched the girls stop in front of the bookstore window. Sophie was explaining something to Lily with gestures. Lily was nodding with the slow nod of someone taking notes mentally. "What I'd do is different from what you should do," he said. "My risk tolerance is built differently. My resources are different. Pause. My calculus around Sophie's life is different from yours because she's yours and not mine, and that changes every variable." "But," she said, because there was a but, and she could hear it. He said the inside threat was the part that mattered most. The operation itself. Operations can be stopped. But someone inside your circle who decided your daughter's safety was a commodity. He thought about how to say the next part. The security protocols, the vetting, those you can rebuild. What's harder is rebuilding your own read on people. Your instinct for who's actually there for the right reasons versus who's performing being there. Was quiet for half a block. "How do you rebuild that?" she said. "Slowly," he said. "And you get it wrong a few more times before you get it right. Just how it goes." He paused. "You also stop beating yourself up for having trusted someone, because trust is not the mistake. The mistake was his. You don't get to take his mistake and make it yours." She looked at him sideways. "You're speaking from experience." He didn't confirm it, and he didn't deny it. He just said, "Most things I know, I learned from getting them wrong first." Ahead of them, Sophie had apparently said something that made Lily laugh, a real laugh, a polite one, the kind that startled out of her. Evan hadn't heard that laugh in a few days. It had been a tense week, quiet in the evenings, Lily doing her careful internal processing. Hearing it now did something to his chest that he didn't examine too closely. Heard it too. He saw her shoulders drop about half an inch. "They're good together," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Sophie doesn't..." She thought about how to say it. "She doesn't make friends easily. She makes acquaintances. Kids she's polite to, kids she's kind to, but she keeps them at a distance. She's been doing it since she was 6. Camille glanced at him. "Since her father left. He didn't push on that. It wasn't his to push on." "Lily's the same," he said. "She's got Mia from school, and she's perfectly social in a room. Close, actually letting someone in, she's careful about it." He paused. "She's been careful about it for a while. It sat between them. The parallel, unspoken but clear. 2 kids shaped by the same kind of specific absence, moving through the world with the particular carefulness of children who'd learned early that some people didn't stay. I don't want Sophie to be like that her whole life," Camille said quietly. "Don't want her growing up thinking that keeping people out is the safest way to be." Ahead, Aunt Lily, who was now pressing her nose slightly against the bookstore window to see something near the back of the display. What you mean," he said. The girls came back. Sophie with a detailed opinion about the bookstore's window display methodology. Lily with a question about whether the bookstore was open on Saturdays because there was a specific book she wanted to look for. They all went into the bookstore. Sophie found the space section in approximately 90 seconds and disappeared into it. Lily found the section she wanted and stood very still in front of a shelf, the way she stood when she was reading a back cover and already deciding yes. Camille and Evan stood in the narrow aisle with a ceiling full of hanging paper stars and the smell of old paper and a cat sleeping on the counter who opened one eye and went back to sleep. "Can I tell you something?" Camille said. "Sure," he said. "I haven't slept properly since the park." She said it matter-of-factly, not looking for sympathy. "Because I'm scared. I'm not scared in the way that keeps you awake. It's more every time I close my eyes I run the afternoon again. All the ways it could have gone differently. All the 15-second windows where everything could have, she stopped. And then I wake up and Sophie is asleep in the next room and I know it didn't. My brain keeps running the version where it did. That'll settle, Evan said. It takes a while, but it settles. Does it ever go completely? He thought about that honestly. He said, but it stops being the loudest thing. She nodded slowly, accepting that, not arguing with it. Sophie emerged from the space section, holding a book about the geometry of black holes that was clearly several years above her reading level, and said, Mom, can I have this? That's a question, not a question, Camille said. Yes, Camille said. Get it. Sophie looked briefly, brilliantly satisfied, and went to find the cat to show it the book. The cat received with its established policy of complete indifference. Lily came to Evan holding a book with a blue cover. Can I? He looked at the price on the inside cover. She handed it to him and went to inspect the cat's reaction to Sophie's book, which she apparently found insufficient. Evan stood in the bookstore aisle holding a book about black holes and a book with a blue cover, listening to his daughter tell a cat that it was being rude, while Camille stood beside him, trying not to smile at a volume that would undermine her parental authority. And outside on Clement Street, the Saturday morning was doing what Saturday mornings did when they were being kind to you. Thought about the walls he'd been standing behind for 4 years. Careful architecture of a life built to stay exactly the size it was. He thought about the way Lily had laughed a minute ago on the sidewalk. Paid for both books at the counter. Camille paid for Sophie's, and there was no standoff about it this time, because they were both looking at the cat. When they came out onto the sidewalk, Sophie was already talking about something she'd read in the first paragraph, and Lily was already asking a question about it. They walked down Clement Street, 4 of them, in the kind of ordinary Saturday morning light that fell on everyone the same. It wasn't anything yet. He was clear-eyed enough to know that. It was a diner and a bookstore and 2 kids who'd eaten too many pancakes and decided they liked each other. Yes, teen. It was a conversation between 2 people who were still figuring out what they were to each other beyond the circumstances that had introduced them. But it was something. He didn't have a name for it. He wasn't sure he needed one yet. He just knew that when they reached the corner where their cars were parked in different directions, and Sophie said to Lily, "You should come to one of my soccer games." And Lily said, "You should come to one of mine." And both of them looked at their respective adults with the expectant faces of children who had already made a decision and were waiting for the adults to catch up. Let's see. He looked at Camille, who was already looking at him with an expression that was partly question and partly something she was still deciding whether to name out loud. Saturday games, he said. Lily's team plays at 9. Sophie's plays at 11, Camille said. He thought about that for approximately 2 seconds. That's a long Saturday, he said. Yes, she agreed. Okay, he said. It was a very small word for the size of what it was conceding. But it was accurate. It was real. And for a man who had spent 4 years being very careful about what he agreed to, it was enough. The girls made plans with the swift decisiveness of people who didn't see any reason to overcomplicate a thing that was simple. He walked back to the truck with Lily, who climbed in and did not complain about the squealing door because she was too busy looking at her blue book. He sat down, put his hands on the wheel, and didn't immediately start the engine. In the side mirror, he could see Camille's car pulling away from the curb half a block down. Sophie was visible in the back seat, still talking, her mouth moving with the particular pace of someone who had a lot of thoughts and complete confidence that they were worth hearing. Lily turned a page. The door squealed in the wind. Started the truck. The first Saturday with both soccer games felt like a logistical experiment that nobody had fully thought through. Lily's game was at 9, on the west field of Claremont Recreation Center, where the grass was slightly uneven near the south goal, and the bleachers held maybe 40 people if everyone was friendly about personal space. Evan arrived at 8:40 with 2 thermoses of coffee, one for himself, one for the general principle of preparedness, and got Lily through her warm-up with the particular focus calm of a man who had learned that pre-game nerves in 8-year-olds were best managed by not acknowledging them directly. Lily played midfielder. She was not the fastest kid on the field, but she read the game well, which Evan thought mattered more in the long run. She had a habit of drifting slightly left of where she was supposed to be, which her coach had been correcting for 2 months with limited success. When she was in the right position, she made decisions quickly and usually correctly, which made up for the drifting most of the time. He was standing on the sideline at 8:53, watching warm-ups, when he heard the door of a car behind him and turned around. Camille was walking across the parking lot toward him. She was wearing a green jacket he hadn't seen before and carrying a coffee from somewhere that was clearly not her kitchen. And she was walking with the expression of someone who was slightly uncertain whether they were early or late and had decided to project confidence about it, either way. Sophie was not with her. He looked behind her at the car. "She has a play date," Camille said, reaching him. She was devastated. "She made me promise to take video. It's a recreational league game," Evan said. "The video quality of experience is roughly equivalent to watching paint dry." "Promised, anyway." She looked at the thermos in his hand. "Is that a second coffee?" "It is. For anyone in particular?" He handed it to her. She took it without ceremony and looked out at the field where Lily was currently attempting to convince her teammate that the correct formation strategy was something she'd apparently invented herself. "Which one's Lily?" "Blue jersey, number 7. Currently arguing with the kid in yellow." Pause. "She gestures a lot when she argues." "She does. Where does she get that from?" He looked at her sideways. She was watching the field with a slight smile and no apparent awareness that she just asked a question that assumed a familiarity they were still building. He didn't point this out. He just said, "Not from me." The game started. Lily's team won 3-2, which was not the score. Lily had predicted she'd said 4-1 with specific confidence, but she'd assisted on 2 of the goals, which she described afterward in considerable detail during the drive across town to Sophie's field. Camille's car was already in the lot when they arrived. Sophie was in warm-ups, identifiable immediately by the way she was directing her teammates through a drill with the organizational authority of someone 10 years older. Lily watched her for a moment. "She's bossy," Lily said. "She's confident," Evan said. Lily considered the distinction. She decided and went to find a spot on the sideline. Yes, he intervened. Camille was standing near the corner flag with a woman Evan didn't recognize, late 40s, professional bearing, the kind of low-key awareness in her body language that Evan recognized as trained. One of the new security people, probably. Camille saw him coming and said something brief to the woman, who moved to a position about 15 feet away that was technically casual and tactically deliberate. "She watches everyone," Camille said, low, when Evan reached her. He said, "That's the point. It makes me feel like I'm being escorted. Better than the alternative," which he suspected. She accepted this without arguing, which she'd already had the same argument with herself. She looked at Lily, who had found a spot at the sideline and was watching Sophie's warm-up with the assessing expression of a fellow soccer player evaluating competition. "How'd the game go?" Camille asked. 3-2. She assisted twice. "She told you it was going to be 4-1. "She did." "How'd she take the discrepancy?" "She's been explaining it to me for 40 minutes. He paused. In some detail, Camille smiled. Sophie does the same thing. After every game, there's a full debrief. What should have happened? What did happen? What the coach got wrong? She paused. Coach has been coaching youth soccer for 12 years. Sophie has been playing for 3. She remains undaunted by this gap. Maybe she's right, Evan said. Honestly, sometimes she is. Camille said it with the rueful tone of a parent who'd had to revise their position on their child's sports analysis more than once. It's very annoying. Sophie's game was tighter 1-1 until the final 10 minutes. Sophie took a ball on the right side, cut inside past a defender who was 2 inches taller than her. Put it in the lower left corner with the composed efficiency of someone who had done that specific thing many times in her head before she did it with her feet. On the sideline, Lily said oh in the quiet way she said things when she was genuinely impressed. Camille said nothing. She just exhaled through her nose and folded her arms, the particular stance of a parent who had been watching their kid do things that moved them for long enough that they'd gotten fairly good at not making a production of it. Final score 2-1. Sophie jogged off the field and went directly to Lily, bypassing her teammates' celebration cluster entirely, and said, "Did you see the second goal?" "Yes," Lily said. "You cut inside. The defender overcommitted," Sophie said. "Kept doing it all game. I waited." "How long did you wait?" "Third time it happened. I went." Sophie picked up her water bottle. "Can't go the first time. They have to be sure you won't." Lily absorbed this with her head slightly tilted. "That's actually smart," Sophie said, and drank her water. Lily looked at Evan with the expression of someone who had found something that warranted further study. He gave her the small nod that meant, "Yes, I see it, too." After that Saturday, there was another one, then another. It happened without any formal arrangement. The way things happened when they were going to happen, regardless of whether anyone planned them. Evan's game schedule overlapped with Camille's. The girls created overlap where there wasn't any, lobbying with the coordinated persistence of a two-person campaign operation that had identified its objective and was pursuing it without deviation. By the fourth Saturday, since Lily was texting Sophie from Evan's phone about something involving a recipe she'd found, and Sophie was replying from Camille's phone with suggestions and amendments. Evan and Camille were standing in the Claremont Recreation Center parking lot, having a conversation about nothing in particular that lasted 35 minutes past the point where either of them had needed to stay. Burger lunches started because of Lily. After Sophie's second game, Lily announced in the parking lot that she was hungry and that there was a place on Fairview that had a burger called The Stack that she believed Sophie would have opinions about, and Sophie said she definitely had opinions about that type of thing, and Camille said she supposed they were going in that direction, and Evan said he supposed they were. The Stack turned out to be a legitimate point of discussion. Sophie rated it a solid 8.4, with a note that the bun-to-patty ratio was ambitious but not unreasonable. Lily ate hers without commentary because she was hungry and didn't have a rating system for burgers. Evan had the same thing he always had when he went there, the plain version, no modifications, and Camille ordered something with avocado on it and then spent the first 3 bites, removing most of the avocado, which she did, without acknowledging that she was doing it. "You don't like avocado," Evan said. She looked up. "I like the idea of avocado. That's different from liking avocado. Many things are theoretically preferable to how they turn out in practice," she said. Lily said, "I don't like avocado either." And then to Sophie, "Do you?" "I like it on some things," Sophie said. "Not on burgers." Texture conflicts. Lily pointed at her. "See the texture conflicts." Looked at Evan. He looked back at her. Neither said anything, and both of them were very nearly smiling at the same time, and the not smiling was its own kind of thing. After the burgers, Lily asked Sophie if she wanted to come over and see the cooking project she'd been working on, which Evan had not been consulted about, and which Camille had not been consulted about, and which both of them therefore agreed to on the spot, because the girls were already putting on their jackets. Cooking project turned out to be Lily's attempt to replicate a pasta dish she'd seen in a video, which she had been working on in stages for the past 2 weeks, adjusting the proportions each time based on what had gone wrong the previous attempt. Current version had 3 problems. Assessments. The sauce was slightly too thick, the noodles were slightly too soft, and she hadn't figured out the cheese situation. Sophie immediately had opinions about the cheese situation. "You need 2 kinds," Sophie said, standing at the kitchen counter with the professional bearing of a person who had spent considerable time in kitchens. "A hard one and a soft one. They do different things." "My dad only has 1 kind," Lily said, "and it's from a bag." Sophie turned and looked at Evan with an expression that was not quite accusatory. "We use what's here," Evan said. "The grocery store is 3 blocks away," Sophie said. "Sophie," Camille said. From the kitchen table where she'd been given coffee, and told to sit down by Lily, who had apparently decided the kitchen logistics were a two-person operation. "I'm just saying," Sophie said, with the precise tone of someone who believed they were offering a constructive observation. "She's right," Lily said to Evan. "We need better cheese." He looked at his 8-year-old, who was wearing a dish towel tucked into her waistband as an apron and holding a wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. Then at Sophie, who was already pulling up something on the tablet to show him what kind of cheese she meant. Took his keys off the hook. "Back in 10 minutes, he said. He came back and ate with 2 different kinds of cheese, and Sophie said the second one was wrong but workable. And Lily said Sophie's standards were very high, and Sophie said low standards were why most pasta was disappointing. The kitchen filled with the sound of serious argument about cheese while something on the stove produced a smell that was encouraging. Caught his eye from the kitchen table. She had her hands wrapped around the coffee mug the same way she'd held the thermos at the soccer field. And she was watching the girls with a look that was warm and a little undone, by itself the look of someone witnessing something they hadn't known they were missing until they saw it. He sat down across from her. "This happen often?" she said quietly. "The being told to buy things. It's escalating," he said. She laughed. It was the same laugh from Clement Street, the unguarded kind, the kind that was a little helpless against itself. He'd been thinking about that laugh, not as a thing to analyze, but as a thing that stayed with him, the way certain sounds stayed the particular key of it, the way it changed her face. "She's good," Camille said, nodding toward Lily. "She knows what she wants, and she goes after it. She's been that way since she could talk. Did she get from you, or—" Camille paused. The sentence found its own shape. Her mother? He'd been waiting for this question, in the way you waited for something you knew was coming and hadn't decided how to handle yet. Dreading it, just knowing it was there. "Both of us," he said. "Probably more from her mom." He looked at the stove, where Lily was doing something precise with the spoon. Dana was very clear about what she wanted and very clear about what she thought. "Lily has that. The directness. You don't have to." Camille started. "It's okay," he said, and it was. Mostly. She died 4 years ago. She had a heart condition that we didn't know about. It was fast. No warning. He said it the way he'd learned to say it, which was plainly, because plainly was the only way that didn't require recovery time afterward. Lily was 4. She doesn't remember much, but she kept the directness. Was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who didn't know what to do with what they'd heard. Just quiet, in the way of someone actually receiving something. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Thank you," he said. Simply, a pause. Then she said Sophie's father isn't dead. He just left. When Sophie was 5. He said the life was too much. Company, the pace, the visibility. She looked at her coffee. He said he wanted something smaller. I don't think he factored Sophie into the equation of what he was leaving. Did he maintain contact? For about a year, then less. Card on her birthday with the wrong age on it. She paused. She stopped mentioning him around the time she turned 7. Like she'd just quietly filed it somewhere and moved on. Her voice was steady but careful. "Sometimes I think that's resilience, and sometimes I think it's just a kid learning not to want something she can't have." "Could be both," Evan said. She looked up. "Yes," she said. Could be." From the stove, Lily announced that the sauce situation was resolved, and Sophie said she'd believe it when she tasted it, and Lily said then taste it, and there was the sound of a spoon, and then a pause. "Okay," Sophie said. "That's actually good." Lily's response to this was quiet but visible from across the room, a small, fierce satisfaction that she tried to keep off her face and mostly succeeded. Pasta was in fact good. Better than Evan had expected from a project that had been in development stages for 2 weeks and involved an emergency cheese run. They ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, with the particular easy disorder of a meal that nobody had fully planned. Someone needed more water. The Parmesan situation was debated further. Lily spilled approximately 2 tablespoons of sauce on the table and cleaned it up with a competence that suggested this had happened before. Ate everything on her plate. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. After dinner, the girls went to Lily's room to do something that involved the blue book from the bookstore and a very long list Sophie was apparently writing. Evan and Camille washed dishes because there was a kitchen full of things that needed washing, and that was just the practical reality. They washed dishes the way people did when they'd reached a certain point of comfort, not performing the task, just doing it, talking across it about things that weren't particularly important. Camille asked about the cabin cruiser job at the marina, which she remembered him mentioning at the diner. He told her it had finished 2 weeks ago, and he'd moved on to a 32-foot sailboat with an electrical system that had been installed by someone who appeared to have learned electrical work from a very short pamphlet. She laughed. He described the specific nature of the wiring situation in some detail because it was genuinely baffling, and she asked questions that were more informed than he'd expected, and she said she'd gone through a sailing phase in her late 20s and had learned to know what she didn't know. Did you like it? He asked. I liked being on the water, she said. I liked going fast. I did not like the parts where things needed to be fixed or maintained or understood mechanically. She handed him a bowl to dry. I have enormous respect for people who understand how things work. I understand how companies work, how people work, how markets work. Show me an engine and I become instantly useless. Companies are just systems, he said. Same as engines. Engines don't have feelings about their performance reviews, she said. So, he conceded the point. The water ran. He dried. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its Friday evening thing, a neighbor's television, a dog, the distant sound of someone's lawnmower finishing up. I want to say something, Camille said. He waited. I've been trying to figure out what to do about you. She said it with the directness she used when she'd been thinking about something long enough that she was done circling it. And I don't mean that the way it sounds. I mean, people have been offering me things since the park. Help, success. My board, my PR team, every person connected to the company has wanted to give me a playbook for how to handle this whole, she gestured slightly, situation. But he gave you a useful one, he said. And nobody gave me a useful one, she confirmed. Because the playbook everyone keeps writing is about what you did at the park, how to acknowledge it publicly, how to respond to the press inquiries, whether to do an interview. She looked at the water running over her hands. But that's not the situation. The situation is she stopped. What is it? He said. She turned the water off, reached for the towel he wasn't currently using, dried her hands in a way that gave her a moment to find the words. Sophie asked me last week if Lily and Evan were our friends, she said. And I said yes. And she said good, because she was going to tell Lily something she hadn't told anyone at school yet. She folded the towel. I don't know what it was. She didn't tell me. But she trusted Lily with it. She looked at him. Sophie doesn't do that. She doesn't let people in like that. He didn't say anything, because he didn't think she was finished. I realized that I'd been spending all this time trying to figure out how to handle the situation, she said. And the girls had just skipped the whole part where you figure it out. They just decided. She paused. I think I've been making it more complicated than it is. What's the uncomplicated version? He asked. She looked at him for a moment. Camille Westbrook, who ran a billion-dollar company with the clear-eyed precision of someone who'd built it from a specific vision and defended it against specific pressures, who sat in boardrooms and financing meetings and made decisions that affected thousands of people, who had been betrayed by someone she trusted and was rebuilding from that without self-pity. That woman looked at him in his kitchen with the dish towel in her hands and said, I like being here. I like that you bought the wrong cheese and didn't apologize for it. I like that you don't want anything from me. I don't know what to do with that, because almost everyone in my life wants something specific from me. And you just... She stopped. You don't. I want you to drink the coffee while it's hot, he said. She blinked, and then she did the laugh again, the real one, the helpless one, and covered her face for a second with both hands. That's exactly what I mean, she said from behind her hands. He was not a man who made speeches. He'd never been good at the part where you said the thing directly. partly because words had always felt inexact to him, and partly because he'd spent so many years in environments where saying the thing directly was either unnecessary or dangerous. But he was standing in his kitchen with a woman who had just told him something honest, and she deserved an honest response. "What this is," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I do. I know that my daughter is a different kid on the Saturdays when Sophie's there. That the last 2 months have been," he thought about it, "different. In ways I didn't expect and didn't plan for." He put the dish towel down. "I'm not good at this. I haven't done it in 4 years, and I wasn't all that good at it before that. I don't have a playbook either." "I know," she said. "But I'm not going anywhere," he said. She looked at him. Just looked at him. Way she'd looked at him that first day in the park, searching, reading, looking for the thing underneath the words. Whatever she found, she seemed to find it acceptable. "Okay," she said. From down the hall, Lily's voice carried Sophie. "That's not how you spell unnecessary." Sophie's voice, "Yes, it is." Lily, "No, it has 2 S's at the beginning." Sophie, "That makes no sense. Why would it have 2 S's? "Because English is weird." A pause. "Sophie." "Okay, fine." Camille and Evan stood in the kitchen listening to this, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "2 S's, Camille said finally. "She's right," Evan said. "English is weird." It was close to 9 when Camille gathered Sophie, who had opinions about leaving, that she expressed primarily through the slowness of her jacket zipping, and they went to the door. Sophie and Lily did the particular extended goodbye of 2 kids who had just spent 4 hours together and somehow still had things to say. Yes, he'd intervened, which went on long enough that Evan and Camille were standing on the porch in the October air, waiting for it to conclude. Sophie said to Lily, finally. Next Saturday, Lily confirmed. Sophie looked at Evan. "We need better cheese in this house." "I'll look into it," he said. She accepted this with the gravity of someone who intended to follow up and went down the porch steps. Paused at the top of the steps. She was wearing her green jacket, her hair doing the thing it did by the end of the evening, coming out of whatever arrangement it had started in. A way that made her look like less of a public person and more of a person who had spent a good 4 hours in someone's kitchen. It looked, he thought, better. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner." She tilted her head slightly. "Everything." "The girls cooked dinner," he said. "You bought the cheese." "Second-rate cheese," he said. Apparently. "It was fine," she said. Yes, he'd intervened. It was good. She looked at him for a moment more, and there was something in the look that was decided, something that had been hovering in the vicinity of a decision for a few weeks, and had landed. "Good night, Evan." "Good night," he said. She went down the steps, and he watched them get into the car. And Sophie's voice drifted back, with something she was telling Camille that he couldn't quite hear. Car pulled away from the curb, and the taillights went down Birchwood Avenue and around the corner. Lily came and stood beside him on the porch. She had the dish towel still tucked into her waistband, which she'd apparently forgotten, and she was looking at the empty street. "Sophie says next Saturday we're doing the second attempt on the pasta," she said. "She wants to try a different kind of noodle." "What kind?" "She has a list." He looked at the empty street for a moment. The night was cool and clear, the kind of October night that smelled like leaves, and the particular dryness that came before everything changed. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah, I like them." She said it simply, without qualification. "Sophie and Camille, I like them." He put his arm around her shoulders. She was getting tall. He kept noticing that, the way it snuck up on him. The way she was becoming herself in increments that were individually invisible, but collectively enormous. "You do," he said. "Do you?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I do." Lily leaned against his side. The porch light was on. The neighbor's TV was still going. Somewhere 3 houses down, someone was taking out their trash, the bins scraping concrete in the ordinary way of an ordinary Friday night on an ordinary street. He stood on his porch with his daughter and felt the walls around his carefully constructed little life do something he hadn't planned for and wasn't sure how to account for. They didn't come down. It wasn't like that. It wasn't some dramatic collapse of everything he'd built. It was quieter than that and realer. They just became For the first time in 4 years, something he was standing inside of instead of hiding behind. Still figuring out the difference. But he had the feeling, standing there in the October dark, with Lily against his side and Sophie's cheese opinion still hanging in the kitchen air, that figuring it out was not something he was going to have to do alone. Courthouse on Meridian Street was a building that took itself seriously. Gray stone, tall windows, the kind of architecture that was designed to make you feel the weight of what happened inside it. Evan had inside it 4 times over the course of 7 months first. No, for the preliminary hearing. Then for 2 rounds of testimony. For this final sentencing that Kowalski had called him about 2 weeks prior, with the particular tone of a man who was closing a file he'd been carrying for a long time. He wore the same jacket he wore to everything that required a jacket. He drove himself. He found parking 2 blocks away and walked, which gave him enough time to settle into the particular stillness he needed for rooms like this one. The gallery was not full, but it wasn't empty either. Press in the back 2 rows, quiet and professional. Some faces he recognized from the investigation detectives, the assistant district attorney who had taken his deposition, a woman from the FBI's financial crimes unit who had been involved once the extortion network's financing was traced across 3 states. Camille was already there when he arrived, sitting in the 3rd row with her attorney and her operations director, a composed woman named Reyes, who had apparently handled the company's crisis response with enough skill that she'd been promoted twice in 6 months. Saw him come in. She moved her coat from the seat beside her without making it look deliberate. He sat down. "How are you?" she said quietly. "Fine," he said. More honestly, ready for it to be over. "Same," she said. They didn't say much after that. The room had its own kind of gravity, and they both understood it. This was not a place for the conversation they would have later. This was the place where the formal end of something got its official stamp, and you sat with that and let it be what it was. The sentencing took 2 hours and 40 minutes. The operation's primary organizer, a man named Delaney, 53, who had run a network of coercion and abduction schemes across 4 states over 11 years, received 22 years. He stood for the sentence with the flat affect of someone who had already grieved the result before it arrived. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 14 years. The 3 men and 1 woman from the park, who had actually been on the ground, were sentenced last, and each sentence was read with the specific legal language that made everything sound both precise and somehow insufficient for what had actually happened on a Saturday afternoon in April. Grant Holloway was sentenced separately in a proceeding 2 weeks earlier that Evan had not attended. Camille had told him afterward, in a text message that was short and careful, 12 years. After a pause, a second message, "I sat in that room and I felt nothing except tired." He'd understood that. Some betrayals didn't make you angry by the end. They just made you tired in a way that took a long time to stop carrying. When the final gavel came down, the room did the thing courtrooms did at the end of long proceedings, a collective exhale, people gathering papers and coats, a low hum of voices replacing the formal silence. Sat still for a moment after everyone around her started moving. Evan sat still with her. "Okay," she said finally. To him specifically, just to the air, the way you said it when you were marking the end of something you'd been holding for too long. "Okay," he said back. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't a crier in public. He'd learned that about her. She saved it for later and processed it in private, but there was something in her face that was recognizably relief. Kind that came mixed with exhaustion because you'd been braced for so long that letting go of the brace took its own effort. Outside on the courthouse steps, the November air was sharp and direct. Press were there, but Camille's PR team had managed the situation, and she gave a brief statement at the bottom of the steps, clear, measured, the language of someone who had been advised and who had also made her own decisions about what she wanted decisions, and it was done in under 5 minutes. She thanked the investigators. She said what needed to be said about Sophie. She did not say Evan's name, because he'd specifically asked her not to, and she'd respected that without pressing him on why. He waited at the edge of the steps. When the press dispersed and Camille's attorney pulled her aside for a few minutes of post-proceeding logistics, Kowalski materialized beside Evan with his hands in his coat pockets and the permanent squint deepened by the November light. "That's it," Kowalski said. "That's it," Evan agreed. "You did good," Kowalski said, not effusively, just as a statement of record, the way Kowalski said most things. "Park, the testimony, all of it. Most civilians in your position would have called and stayed on the bench." "Wasn't really an option," Evan said. "No," Kowalski said. "I don't suppose it was." He looked out at Meridian Street for a moment. "I've been doing this a long time. Most cases like this, the inside man is the last piece you find. You handed us the thread before we knew there was a thread." He paused. "I'm not in the habit of saying this to civilians, but you're good at what you do. What I do is fix boats," Evan said. Kowalski almost smiled. "Sure," he said. "Take care of yourself, Mercer." They shook hands, and Kowalski went back inside, and Evan stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the gray November sky for a moment. 7 months from a Saturday morning in a park to this step on this street. Seven months of depositions and testimony and the slow, grinding machinery of a legal process that moved at the speed of something that was going to be thorough, whether you wanted it to be fast or not. 7 months of Saturdays that had built into something he didn't have a clean word for. And a Tuesday evening about 2 months ago when he'd been sitting in Camille's kitchen, her kitchen that time, not his, kitchen that was larger than his by a considerable margin and had better cheese as a default, and Lily had been in Sophie's room, and Camille had been reading something on her laptop, and he'd been reading the newspaper, actual paper, which she had delivered, and never stopped teasing him about. She'd looked up from her laptop at some point and said, "You know what's strange?" "What this?" She'd gestured between them and at the kitchen in general. "How ordinary this is. I've spent 10 years building a life that doesn't really have ordinary in it. And this," she'd looked at him. "This is just ordinary." He'd considered what she meant. Is that bad? She'd thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously. She'd said, "It's the opposite of bad. It just caught me off guard." He'd gone back to the newspaper. After a moment, she'd gone back to the laptop. And in Sophie's room, the girls had apparently started an argument about something involving the recipe system Sophie was now developing, which was going to be, Lily had informed him that morning, extremely comprehensive. Ordinary, he'd thought that night, driving home with Lily asleep in the passenger seat. He hadn't known he was still capable of ordinary. He'd spent 4 years treating it like a thing he had to protect from the outside. He'd built the quiet life, the small life, the life that fit in the space between work and Lily's school schedule, and the truck with the squealing door, and he'd thought that was ordinary. He hadn't known what ordinary actually felt like until it started feeling like this. Came up the steps toward him, her attorney finished, her coat pulled against the cold. She looked lighter than she had going in. Not happy exactly, this wasn't a happy occasion. It was the end of an ordeal, but lighter in the way people looked when they'd put something down that they'd been carrying for months and their body was only just now remembering what it felt like to have both hands free. "Sophie's at home with her protection detail," she said. "She texted me 18 times during the sentencing." "What? The cheese situation?" "Primarily." Camille pulled her coat tighter. "She's decided the pasta requires a 5th iteration." What was wrong with the 4th? "The noodles were slightly too thin, apparently. And Lily agrees, which means I will be hearing about this in considerable detail later today." She looked at him. "She also wants to know if we're coming straight home or stopping somewhere first." He looked at her. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd ask you." He thought about the courthouse, and Kowalski, and the final sentencing, and 22 years, and the gray November sky, and the 7 months of Saturdays that had accumulated into something he was still finding the shape of. "There's a place on Dunmore that has good soup," he said. "Cold days. Soup. You don't have to want soup." "I want soup," she said. "And then I want to not be in the vicinity of this building anymore." "That I understand completely," he said. They walked down the courthouse steps together in the November cold, And he texted Lily, who texted Sophie, and within approximately 90 seconds there was a detailed reply from Sophie, inquiring whether the soup place had bread, and what kind, which Camille showed him with the expression of a woman who had accepted that her daughter was going to be like this always, and had made her peace with it. The soup place on Dunmore was small, warm, and loud in the way of places that were successful because the food was good, and not because anyone had thought carefully about the acoustics. They got a table near the window. Outside, the city did what it did on cold November. Tuesdays, people walking fast with their hands in their pockets. The delivery truck double parked. Couple arguing at a crosswalk, with the resigned body language of two people who'd had this specific argument before and knew how it ended. Evan had the chicken and wild rice. Camille had the tomato bisque, which came with bread, which she reported to Sophie via text with a photograph. Sophie texted back a rating before Camille had even tasted it, based solely on the photograph, which was the most Sophie thing that had ever happened in Evan's presence. "I need to tell you something," Camille said after the bread. He waited. "The Singapore expansion, I've been putting off the final decision about relocating operations, partly because..." She paused. "It would require me to be there for extended periods. 3-4 months at a time, initially." He kept his face neutral. "How extended are we talking?" "The first phase would be 4 months, starting in February." She looked at him directly the way she did when she was delivering information she'd thought about carefully and was not going to soften beyond a certain point. "Asking your permission. I'm telling you because it affects..." She stopped. "Started again, because you should know." "Okay," he said. "That's it? What else would you like me to say?" She looked at him. "Most people would have an opinion about it." "I have opinions about plenty of things," he said. "Your company isn't one of them. You built it. You know what it needs." He tore a piece of bread. "What does Sophie think?" Camille was quiet for a moment. Over the months that she did this specific silence when he'd said something that required her to recalibrate slightly, when he'd responded to something in a way that was different from the responses she'd been expecting, and she needed a second to adjust. "Sophie thinks she's coming to Singapore," Camille said. "She has a list of restaurants she wants to try." "Of course she does." Camille stopped. Something shifted in her face. Public-facing composure that she wore so naturally it had become invisible to him now, except in the moments when it moved aside for something underneath. She asked if Lily and Evan could visit. The table was small, and the soup was hot, and outside the window someone's umbrella inverted in the wind, and they fought with it on the sidewalk, with the philosophical resignation of a person who had been through this before. "Could they?" Evan said. Camille met his eyes. "That depends on whether Lily and Evan want to." "February's a long way away," he said. "Yes, a lot can change by February." She said, "It can." She held his gaze. "Or it can stay the same. Or it can become something it isn't yet." She picked up her spoon. "I've stopped trying to predict it." "When did that happen?" She thought about it. "Sometime around the 3rd Saturday," she said. "Kept trying to figure out what we were, and where it was going, and what the right way to handle it was. One Saturday I was sitting on the sideline at Lily's game drinking your thermos coffee, and Sophie scored and Lily yelled louder than anyone, and she shook her head slightly. I stopped calculating. It felt like wasted effort." He understood exactly what she meant. He'd had the same experience, around the same time, sitting in her car while she was inside a school pickup, and Sophie and Lily were in the backseat having an argument about whether mushrooms were an acceptable pizza topping. Yes, and he'd been sitting in the passenger seat of a car that cost more than he made in 2 years and thinking about nothing except whether the soup place on Dunmore was still open for dinner. And he'd realized that the calculation he'd been running for years, the careful measure of how much to let in versus how much to keep out, had simply stopped running. Because he'd made a decision. Because the question had become irrelevant. "Lily asked me something last week," he said. Camille looked up. "She asked me if Sophie was going to be in her life for a long time." He looked at the window. She said it like it was a practical question. Like she was asking if we needed to buy more of the good cheese. "What did you say?" I said I thought so. He paused. She said, "Good. because she was going to need help with the pasta project, and she didn't want to start over with someone new. Camille's face did the thing it did, sometimes the thing where something moved through it that was too large for the moment and too real to hide. Yet, too. She looked down the biscuit for a second, and when she looked up, she was composed again, but the something was still there around the edges. Sophie told me, Camille said carefully, that she thinks Lily is the smartest person she's ever met who isn't an adult. High praise, Evan said. From Sophie, it's extraordinary. She looked at him. She also said, and I'm quoting directly, Evan's okay too. He listens when you talk, which most people don't. He was quiet for a moment. That's the nicest thing she's ever said to me. She doesn't know she said it to you. She said it to me. Still counts. Camille's smile was the small, private one, not the polished one she wore in public, the unguarded laugh that surprised her sometimes. But the middle one, the one that lived between those two things and was maybe the most honest of the three. They finished the soup, he paid, and she didn't argue this time, just pulled on her coat and said thank you in the easy way of someone who had stopped keeping score of the small gestures. Outside on Dunmore, the cold had sharpened in the early afternoon. The way November cold did not brutal, but serious. A cold that meant business. She turned up her collar. He put his hands in his pockets. They walked the half block to where she'd parked and stood beside the car for a moment in the way they did at the end of things, neither of them quite ready to be in separate vehicles yet, and both of them aware of that without making a thing of it. We should get back, she said. Yeah, the pasta situation is apparently time-sensitive. Sophie's rating system waits for no one, he said. She laughed. The real one. Right there on Dunmore Street in the November cold, outside the courthouse, at the end of the longest 7 months of both their lives, she laughed the unguarded laugh that was still the best sound he'd found in this unexpected thing they'd built. He drove back to his house alone, the truck cab quiet, Birchwood Avenue, doing its usual afternoon routine. He thought about Dana for a moment, which he did sometimes without planning to not, with the old grief that used to land like something physical, but with the quieter knowledge of someone who had learned slowly and without wanting to how to carry a loss without being defined by it. He thought she would have found Sophie's rating system hilarious. He thought she would have told him 4 years ago, when he'd started building the walls, that he was doing it wrong, not the grief, the protection of Lily, the architecture of keeping everything at a size that couldn't surprise him. He thought she probably would have been right. He got home at 3, and at 3:30 Camille's car pulled up outside, and Sophie came through the door already talking about the 5th pasta attempt with a focus that suggested she'd been composing her thoughts during the drive. Lily met her at the door, with her own notes, actual notes, written on a piece of paper in her handwriting that got more distinct every month. They went to the kitchen immediately. Evan and Camille stood in the hallway for a second, listening to the girls collide with the specific productive energy of two people who had a shared project and a shared language for it and no patience for preliminary conversation. They're going to do this for years, Camille said, low. Probably, he said, long after the pasta is perfect. The pasta will never be perfect, he said. That's not what it's about. She said, I suppose it isn't. He went to the kitchen and got out the good cheese, the right kind now, he'd learned, which lived on the second shelf, and Sophie said, thank you without looking up from her notes. And Lily said they needed the smaller pot, not the large one. And he got the smaller pot. And Camille sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop to catch up on the 3 hours of work she'd lost to the courthouse. The kitchen filled with the sound of two kids cooking and arguing, and occasionally referring to the notes. It was less loud and slightly chaotic, and the first attempt at the new noodle thickness was, by Sophie's assessment, still not right, and Lily disagreed, and they ate it anyway, and both finished their bowls, which Evan thought was all the evidence you needed. After dinner, after the dishes, after Sophie had updated her notebook, and Lily had filed a formal counter-opinion on the noodle situation that Sophie said she would consider After the October dark had settled into November dark outside the kitchen window, Camille was put on her coat in the hallway, and Sophie was wrestling with her backpack. And Lily was standing near the door with the dish towel still in her waistband, because she always forgot about the dish towel, and Evan was holding the door, and it was just the end of an ordinary evening. Sophie said to Lily, Next time the noodles, Lily confirmed. They did the extended goodbye. It was shorter than usual because they were both tired, which Evan thought was its own sign of comfort that they no longer needed the extended goodbye to hold the connection. The connection held on its own now. Camille paused at the door. She did this sometimes, a pause that was long enough to be intentional and short enough to not require explanation. Courthouse today, she said. I'm glad you were there. He said, I know you know. She looked at him. I just wanted to say it plainly. He looked back at her. He said again. Different weight on it this time. The weight of someone who understood what she meant and wasn't going to dress it up more than it needed. She nodded, went down the porch steps. Sophie was already at the car, already talking about something, already on to the next thing with the forward momentum that was just her nature, the same way Lily's nature was to think carefully before she spoke. And both of them were going to be exactly who they were, and that was not a problem to solve, but a fact to be grateful for. He stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared around the corner of Birchwood Avenue, the same corner he'd watched them turn around every time they left, for months now. Lily came and stood beside him. She'd finally noticed the dish towel and was folding it in the approximate way of someone who had folded it many times and didn't need to think about it. Porch light was on. The neighborhood was quiet. She forgot her scarf, Lily said, looking at the dark street. Evan looked. The green scarf Camille had brought was on the hook by the door. She'll get it Saturday, he said. Lily looked at the scarf, then at the empty street. She leaves things here now, she said. Observationally. Not quite a question. Yeah, he said. Sophie left her notebook last week. I know. She asked for it back Wednesday. Lily considered this with the careful attention she gave to most things. That's different from before, she said. When we first went to the diner, they didn't leave things. He didn't have an answer to that. She wasn't really asking for one. It means they're going to come back, Lily said. Simple as that. She'd worked it out in the way. She worked everything out, observed. The evidence, reached the conclusion, filed it. She wasn't anxious about it. She was just noting it the way you noted something that had become true. So gradually, Yo almost missed the moment it happened. Put his arm around her. She leaned into him, the way she had in the rain in April, except now it was November, and nobody was frightened, and the evening smelled like pasta and cold air, and everything was exactly as ordinary as it was supposed to be. Dad, she said. Yeah. Is this what it's supposed to be like? He looked out at Birchwood Avenue. The neighbor's light was on. Pothole was still there, no. The tree at the end of the block had lost most of its leaves, and they were in a pile that would need dealing with before the week was out. He thought about a park bench in April and a little girl in a yellow dress, and the 5 pairs of eyes he'd noticed moving together across a crowded lawn. He thought about the rain on the glass pavilion, and Sophie running toward the exit, and Lily standing in a food line for 20 minutes because he'd asked her to and she'd trusted him enough to do it. He thought about a diner on Clement Street and a bookstore with a cat and the wrong kind of cheese and the right kind of cheese and a courthouse on Meridian Street where something bad had finally been finished. Thought about Dana briefly, warmly, without the old weight. He thought about the fact that he'd spent 4 years believing that keeping everything small was the same as keeping everything safe, and the fact that it had taken a stranger's child in a yellow dress and a woman who ate avocado on principle, and 2 kids with a pasta project and a rating system for restaurants to show him that he'd been wrong about that. Catastrophically wrong. Not foolishly wrong. Just wrong in the quiet way that people were wrong about things when fear had been doing their thinking for them long enough that they'd stopped noticing. A safe life wasn't one where nobody got inside. He understood that now, not as a concept but as a fact lived daily in a kitchen that smelled like pasta, and on soccer sidelines and in diners with too much cheese on the menu. It was one where the right people finally did. He looked down at Lily. "That," he said, "I think this is exactly what it's supposed to be like." She thought about it for a moment with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. She said, "I think so too." The porch light hummed. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone's dog barked twice and stopped. Truck sat in the driveway with its squealing door still unrepaired, which he was going to fix. Genuinely, one of these weekends. This weekend was soccer games and soup, and the fifth pasta attempt, and a scarf on the hook by the door that meant someone was coming back for it. He'd get to the door after that. He had time. They went inside, and the door closed behind them, and the porch light stayed on the way he always left it, out of habit, or out of something better than habit. Some quiet acknowledgement that the light being on meant someone knew the way home. And on Birchwood Avenue, in the particular peace of an ordinary November night, that was more than enough. That was everything.